Jim, we were just mentioning that the membership of LAFCO remains as it was originally. That
Yeah, I don't think it's changed. Nor the composition hasn't changed. Some of the authority, LAFCO has actually been given additional authority and making it a stronger agency rather than, those same powers could have been given to the Planning Commission and it could have functioned in that fashion. But creating special agencies is the way they do things in Sacramento.
So now I want to ask you about your first exposure to some of the people who were very strong proponents of not only maintaining the ag preserve, but expanding its sphere. Who were some of the early people that you encountered in the county?
Well, the elected official, the county supervisors, um, had been the prime movers, and the county planning commission, who had stuck their neck out to adopt this concept, which wasn't all that overwhelmingly popular at the time they did it, because it looked like, in the view of some of the property owners, that their property had been taken away from them and made exclusively agriculture, and that didn't make them very happy, and they did things like suing the county over the legality of having an ordinance of that nature. Um, but there were a number of groups at that time very active in the county. The Upper Napa Valley Associates, UNVA that was called, consisted of a lot of interested individuals living in the county who were very much in favor of preserving the open space land, preserving the agriculture. Uh, and there was another group called Cause. There were several of those groups that had a fairly large membership. Unfortunately, there are none of them left today. They've all just sort of gone by the wayside, and they were a very valuable resource in the planning and implementation in the valley.
Who are some of the people that you remember as active in the Upper Napa Valley Association
Well,
in these years?
in the early beginning of it, they had people like Bob Mondavi and Louis Martini and those Jack Davies were active in UNVA, uh, and it was they used to have an annual uh, Christmas event that was one of the big events in the valley. And so there were some of the vintners and some of the growers who were supportive, and obviously there were some who didn't like the idea of being told that the use of their land was limited to just agriculture.
And what was UNVA's role? What was their mission?
Well, they would simply appear, they would show up at public hearings and campaign for those ideas that were pro-agriculture, pro-conservation for the county. They were very strong and very outspoken, and they would circulate petitions uh, in order to provide the elected official with some backing for making the decision, which would probably also have opposition.
Wasn't there a plan for development that UNVA uh, objected to, a hotel development?
Well, after the general plan had been completely rewritten and redeveloped, focusing as the board was interested in focusing on agriculture as the highest and best use of the land. Um the the plan was adopted, and the rezoning according to that plan was completed, and the voters had initiated a petition to create what they called Measure A, and Measure A was a limitation on the amount of housing to be allowed in the county, not to exceed the rate of growth of the state, the nation, the region, which was about a little over 1%. I think it was 1.2%. Uh, And that was approved by the voters at the time in 1979, but they also elected a couple of supervisors that connected with one of the existing supervisors, which gave a majority to what the groups viewed as a pro-development board. So they sued the county on well, one of the first things the board did was it fired the entire planning commission and appointed a brand new planning commission. So you had a whole new planning commission. And so some of the people on the planning commission, the members, one of them was a lawyer, Vic Fershko, and they sued the county on the adequacy of the general plan.
Well, we've kind of jumped ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to the general plan, because this was a very important contribution to the Ag Preserve, and this was your baby.
Well, yeah, again, it was the problem was to put down on paper what people felt was workable, and put down on paper the concept that could be implemented, because otherwise it's a waste of time. You've got to have the public support, and you certainly have to have the elected officials' support. Otherwise, planning is simply an idle act. And the plan, as it was finally completed, and one of the things that we did actually is we developed some growth alternatives and mailed it to all of the registered. I think it went out with the tax bills one year, and it was a questionnaire. Would you prefer this or that or this or that? And when the questionnaires came back, it was overwhelmingly that they not only favored the smallest population increase, but we had as many votes for less than the smallest increase as we did for all of the higher population figures. There were 3 different levels of population growth. And so the message clearly was that the voters out in the county were not in favor of an intensive development in the unincorporated area.
So when you came to the county, did you begin working on the general plan right away? Was this one of your first?
Oh yeah, that was the big assignment. I mean, the big assignment was to get a new general plan, get a new zoning ordinance, and get the county rezoned in consistency with the general plan, because the Ag Preserve was just one section. It was one section of the zoning ordinance dealing with land in the valley floor. I mean, that's not the entire county, and consequently the whole general plan needed to be redone to pick up that theme.
And then the general plan would direct what would happen to the incorporated city areas.
Well, the county has it has influence, but it has no power over the cities. The cities are a totally separate entity of government from the county. The county power and the city's powers are specified in state law, and the county cannot tell the city what to do, and the city can't tell the county what to do. They're independent of each other.
So the general plan applies to only the county areas.
Unincorporated areas.
Unincorporated areas.
But since everybody is a citizen in the county, even the people in the cities get to vote on measures that would impact the county, because they are citizens of the county.
And now the general plan ended up being quite long. You said 300 and...
Well, yeah, it was a rather long document, but the problem, as we saw it, was that nobody's probably ever going to read the whole thing, and the concern was how to translate that into an understandable concept. So basically there were two sentences that summed the whole thing up. If you could understand those 2 sentences, you understood what the plan provided. And one was that urban development belongs in urban areas. And the second one was agriculture is the highest and best use of the land in the unincorporated area. Urban development belongs in urban areas means that the county did not approve packaged water and sewer plants in the unincorporated area. The county did not provide for shopping malls. The county, the general plan provided that the existing downtown areas in the four cities in the county would serve as the shopping areas for the unincorporated area, so that there were no shopping malls, no used car lots, no any of the things that you see in so many of the counties. Like in Sacramento County, they got more people living in the unincorporated area than they do living in the city of Sacramento. In other words, it's all pretty much urbanized, and that becomes the highest and best use, and agriculture is simply a holding action until the urban development gets there.
And where did the expression highest and best use come from?
Well, that's a legal term in terms of highest and best use of the land. It's in the state codes dealing with land use in general plan.
What was Jack Fisk's role in determining that agriculture could actually drive the economy?
Well, he was the agricultural advisor and the director for the agricultural advisor from the college. The UC signed one to the county, and he had developed what he called an economic growth model, and that model was to demonstrate how agriculture could successfully provide a reasonable source of income for the county, as well as urbanizing it. In other words, a lot of counties believed they had to have industrial, commercial area in order to make sufficient monies to provide services to residential areas. His idea was that you could do it with agriculture.
And that was incredibly new at the time, because weren't most counties looking at the number of jobs that could be created with development projects?
Well, I think that's true, but if you look at the overall picture, if you do not have an unincorporated area which is populated, you don't need schools, you don't need water, you don't need sewer, you don't need the intensive kind of police and fire protection that you have for cities. And so actually what the county was saying is that if you're going to build urban densities, you need all of those services, and you should be in a city where the services are available, where you've got the police, the fire, the water, the sewer, the schools, the buses, and so on, and don't spread it all over the unincorporated area and then try to figure out how you're going to service it, because that simply complicates the problem of providing service and the cost of providing service. So if you don't have the population, you don't have to provide the services, and therefore, from an economic standpoint, you can operate on a much lower level by maintaining agriculture, if the agriculture will provide you with sufficient income to operate the county government.
So Jack Fisk, whose real name is John, was the county farm advisor. He was at the University of California Davis Extension.
Right. Yeah, but he was assigned to Napa County. He worked in Napa County.
And what was James Leader's role?
Well, Jim Leader was also one of the agricultural advisors, and they sort of jointly agreed on the concept of agriculture as an economic viable future for the county.
Now we're talking about, this is still in the early 70s.
Yes, yeah.
When was the general plan completed?
Well, the general plan was completed. The first draft of it was probably like 74, and the final adoption and the rezoning was completed by around 79.
And eventually the document was well over 350 pages, I know, but I love your story about how you hired someone who was a grade school teacher.
Oh, that was with the Association of Bay Area Governments
Oh, that was with ABAG?
yeah, when I had completed the preliminary regional plan. The concern was, it was it all full of planner's language that nobody else would understand. So I hired a gentleman who wrote textbooks for second and third graders, and I gave him a draft of the plan, and I asked him to read it and tell me what he couldn't understand. And so after he had read it and looked at it, I had several meetings with him, and he would point out things that didn't make any sense to him. And I figured if he could write books for second and third graders, he ought to be able to be a good source of understandable language for county supervisors, city councilmen, and all of the technicians, and including the planners, who were going to have to read the document and work with the document. So it was rewritten based on his recommendations in part. The other thing was that the document was limited to not more than, say, 50 pages, and it had to be a size that you could fit on a bookshelf. And the reason for that was if they get bigger than that, people just throw them away and never look at them again.
Well, what about the Napa County General Plan now?
Well, the Napa County General Plan was rather bulky, but it was understandable in the two-sentence concept of urban development belongs in urban areas. If you accept that idea, you have the concept of the plan, and the details of the plan are simply how that's to be done. If you don't agree with that, then the details aren't going to make any sense to you because you aren't going to move in that direction anyway. So generally, if you believed urban development belonged in urban areas, as you read the plan, there were 5 major goals. And the first goal spoke specifically to the preservation of agricultural land as the highest and best use of the land in the unincorporated area. I mean, if you didn't agree with that goal, then you probably weren't going to agree with much of what followed.
And this was a very long process, putting the general plan together. You were saying from 74 to 79?
Well, it was a long process, but it involved numbers of hearings. We had to develop a whole new general plan. As I indicated, we had to get the public input. There are public hearings required. Then we had a preliminary plan. You hold public hearings on the preliminary plan at the Board of Supervisors level, at the Planning Commission level. Then you prepare the final plan and you go back to the hearing process again. You have hearings around the county by the Planning Commission. Then you have hearings by the Board of Supervisors, and then you have the adoption of the plan. Now, once you have adopted the general plan, in 1968, the state law changed and it said that your zoning must be consistent with the general plan. That was a whole new idea, as I mentioned earlier. It used to be your zoning and your general plan didn't have to look anything alike. Well, in 1968, the state law changed. It said zoning and planning must be consistent. So when you adopt a new general plan, you then have to rezone the entire county, the unincorporated area, to be consistent with the general plan. And what that means is you have to go back into public hearings in each of the areas of the county, and then you have to go through the actual rezoning, which involves more public hearings and so on. So that was about an average length of time to develop a new general plan and get all the rezoning done. And of course then, when the county was sued over the adequacy of the general plan by the former planning commissioners, who knew where all the weaknesses were, so they could make that the issue in the court case, then we had to go before a superior court judge and demonstrate to him that our plan was consistent with the state guidelines for a general plan. And then we had to go and rezone again to make satisfy the Superior Court, we had rezoned to be consistent with the general plan. And that took a number of years.
Well, how contentious were the public hearings? What was the response?
Well, the public hearings generally were supportive of the concept of preservation of agricultural land, but individual property owners might be very unhappy with it. Obviously, they felt that they could get more value out of their land selling it for a non-agricultural use. Although the price of the land for grapes, if your land was available for a vineyard, the price, as you know, boomed in the county in the 1970s. Starting in 1970, we processed one winery a month for 10 years. I mean, that's 120 wineries. And there just didn't seem to be any end to the new wineries. At one point, one member of the Planning Commission added up what he thought was all the gallons of wine being produced, and he added up all the wineries' capacity, and he said, we reached a point where we don't need any more wineries because we're at the capacity of the vineyards. Well, that didn't last very long, but that was an idea that came along. I mean, we should limit the number of wineries, but needless to say, it never got much support anywhere.
Now, who were the former planning commissioners who were objecting to the general plan?
Well, Vic Furshko was a local attorney, and he was one time he was president of the citizens group called Cause, which dealt with housing and so on, and he was one of the planning commissioners who took up the issue of the adequacy of the general plan, which tied it up for, like you say, 2 or 3 years, and in that time they elected new supervisors who were pro-agriculture.
And who were the new supervisors then, being pro-agriculture? Do you remember who they were? That was Dewey Anderson still in?
Oh no, Dewey Anderson had dropped out many years before then.
And Henry Wigger was gone.
Henry Wigger was gone. Yeah.
Jack
Ferguson was no longer a supervisor. No.
And Julius Kyoka.
Julie Kyoka, and he wasn't, and Pete Clark, none of those supervisors. Most of those supervisors were out of office before, certainly before the end of the 70s and probably in the mid-70s.
These were the supervisors who were seated during the 1968 passage of the county ordinance for the
Right,
ag reserve.
yes. Yeah.
Who in the county did you find most helpful as a proponent of the general plan?
Well, like I say, there were the conservation groups and the people who were associated with them. There were some of the growers and the vintners, Louis Martini,